No one in the Valoran fleet believed they would survive the week. The ships drifted to the void like wounded animals, their once proud hulls scarred by plasma burns and shattered armor plates. Engines sputtered unevenly. Shield generators flickered like dying stars. Entire sections of the fleet had gone silent days ago, their crews either evacuated or lost when the Carthane Dominion crushed their last defensive line. At the center of the formation floated the command vessel, Resolute Dawn. Inside its dimly lit bridge, Captain Adrian Varkon stared at the holographic map hovering above the command table. The display showed only one safe destination left within reach: Earth. The name still felt strange in his mouth. A young world, a recently spacefaring species. Humans had joined the wider galactic community barely 2 decades earlier. Most civilizations still viewed them as curious newcomers. Clever engineers, perhaps, but politically insignificant. And yet, Earth possessed something the Valorans desperately needed: shipyards, massive orbital construction platforms capable of repairing vessels far larger than anything humans themselves used. Status report, Varkon said quietly. Commander Lucas Wren, the fleet's operations officer, glanced down at his console before answering. 32 ships still operational, Wren said. But that number is generous. He hesitated. 7 vessels have lost primary propulsion. They're being towed. Another officer added grimly, weapon systems across the fleet are barely functioning. Even if the Dominion finds us with a single patrol group, we won't survive the encounter. The words hung heavy in the air. They all knew it already. The Valoran fleet was not retreating. It was running. A soft tone echoed through the bridge as the navigation console updated. Entering Sol System in 12 hours, Wren said. Varkon leaned back in his command chair. 12 hours. After months of running, months of watching friends and allies vanish under Dominion bombardments, it had all come down to this one decision: trust humans, or die. The fleet crossed the outer boundary of the solar system in silence. Human listening stations detected them immediately. Within minutes, the communication console lit up. Incoming transmission from Earth Defense Command, Wren announced. Varkon nodded. On screen, the holographic display flickered, revealing a human officer seated inside a brightly lit command center. She looked calm, far calmer than anyone facing a damaged alien fleet drifting into their territory should be. Valoran vessels, she said, her voice steady. This is Admiral Marcus Hale of Earth Defense Command. State your intentions. Varkon stepped forward. We request emergency repair access, he said. Our fleet has been engaged in combat operations against the Carthane Dominion and has suffered extensive damage. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. We are not here as combatants, only refugees seeking assistance. For several seconds, the human admiral said nothing. Behind Varkon, several officers shifted nervously. Then Hale nodded once. You're cleared to approach Earth orbit. The entire Valoran bridge froze. Wren blinked. That's it. The admiral seemed mildly amused. Your fleet looks like it barely survived a meteor storm. Hale said, if we wanted to fight you, we wouldn't wait until you reached orbit. A few nervous chuckles rippled across the bridge. Proceed to the shipyards above Luna, Hale continued. Our engineers will begin assessments immediately. The transmission ended. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Wren exhaled slowly. Well, he said, that was easy and expected. Varkon allowed himself a small nod. Maybe they had survived after all. 6 hours later, the Valoran fleet entered Earth orbit, and everything became strange. The human shipyards were enormous. Gigantic ring-shaped construction platforms surrounded the moon, each one glowing with constant activity. Thousands of small craft darted between dry docks. Cargo haulers carried massive sections of unfinished vessels through open space. Even damaged Valoran warships looked small beside the towering industrial structures. Docking guidance received, Wren said. Massive mechanical arms extended from the nearest platform, gently pulling the first Valoran cruiser into a repair cradle. Inside the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn, Captain Varkon and several officers watched human technicians swarm across the damaged hull. But something felt wrong. "They're removing our weapon mounts," one officer said. Another pointed at the display. "They're detaching the entire engine assembly." Varkon frowned. "That's not repair work," he said. Wren tapped his console, pulling up the shipyard activity logs. His eyes widened. "Captain, they're dismantling every major system." Varkon turned toward the communications console. "Open a channel to the engineering teams." Moments later, a human technician appeared on the screen. He wore a grease-stained uniform and looked mildly distracted. "Yes," he said. Varkon gestured toward the external camera feed. "Your crews appear to be disassembling our ships," he said carefully. The technician glanced at the feed. "Oh, yeah," he said casually. The Valoran officers exchanged confused looks. "That was not the agreement," Varkon said. The human technician scratched his head. "Relax," he replied. "We're fixing them." Varkon gestured again to the dismantled hull sections drifting toward the shipyard interior. "That does not look like repair." The technician leaned closer to the camera. Then he said something that made every Valoran officer in the room go silent. "Well, technically it is." He shrugged. "Your ships weren't broken." A faint grin appeared on his face. "They were just built wrong." Outside the observation window, massive shipyard cranes began pulling entire sections of Valoran warships into the glowing depths of Earth's orbital factories. And for the first time since the war began, Captain Adrian Varkon felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. 3 days after arriving in the Sol system, the Valoran fleet barely resembled a fleet anymore. From the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn, Captain Adrian Varkon watched as another one of his warships vanished into the enormous human shipyard orbiting the moon. Not repaired, not inspected, taken apart. Gigantic mechanical arms surrounded the Valoran cruiser Starfall, lifting entire hull segment away as if the vessel were a simple machine instead of a complex warship that had taken decades to design. Sections of armor floated into the shipyard's glowing interior. Weapon mounts followed. Then the engines. Commander Lucas Wren stood beside Varkon, staring at the live telemetry feed. "They just removed the entire propulsion system," Wren said. Varkon rubbed his temples slowly. "That engine configuration passed 3 Imperial Engineering Councils." Wren nodded. "Yes, and apparently humanity disagrees." Across the shipyard, dozens of human work crews moved with incredible speed. Small maneuvering drones zipped across hull surfaces, cutting apart structural plates and carrying components away. What confused the Valoran engineers most wasn't the speed. It was the confidence. Humans didn't hesitate. They didn't debate. They simply changed things. Inside one of the human engineering bays, Valoran specialists were watching the process up close. The room smelled faintly of machine oil and hot metal. Holographic design projections filled the air above a long work table, where several human engineers were discussing something animatedly. One of them, a tall man with messy hair and a welding visor pushed up onto his forehead, was explaining a new engine configuration. Valoran engineer Tarek Solon folded his arms. "This violates 3 structural safety standards," Solon said. The human engineer looked up from the display. "Only 3?" he asked. Solon blinked. "Those standards exist for a reason." The human shrugged. "Sure, but they also limit performance." He tapped the holographic projection. The new engine design rotated slowly in the air. "We moved the power conduits closer to the reactor core," he explained. "Shorter distance means faster energy transfer." Solon stared. "That will overload your cooling systems." "Only if we use your cooling systems," the human replied. Another human engineer slid a new component into the holographic design. A completely different thermal regulator system appeared. Solon leaned closer. "That isn't Valoran technology." "Nope," the engineer said cheerfully. "It's ours." Solon frowned. "But your ships are much smaller. How does this scale?" The human grinned. "That's the fun part." Back on the Resolute Dawn, Captain Varkon received the first official performance report. He stared at the numbers. Then he checked them again. Commander Wren noticed his expression. "Bad news?" Varkon slowly turned the display toward him. Wren read the report. Then his eyes widened. "These numbers are impossible. They're from the Starfall, Varkon said. The cruiser had been the first ship completely rebuilt by the human engineers. Its systems had just finished their initial test run. Wren scrolled through the data. Engine output increased by 40%. He looked further. Shield efficiency improved by 32%. Then he reached the weapons section. Captain, Varkon nodded slowly. I saw that. The weapons output had nearly doubled. Wren leaned back in disbelief. They didn't just repair the ship. No, Varkon said quietly. They redesigned it. Later that day, the Starfall left its repair cradle for its first full system test. Hundreds of human technicians watched from control stations as the cruiser drifted away from the shipyard. Captain Varkon and several Valoran officers observed from the human command deck. Begin engine ignition, a technician announced. Outside the viewing window, the cruiser's engines glowed. Then something unexpected happened. The ship accelerated. Fast. Much faster than anyone predicted. The cruiser streaked across open space, leaving its escort drone struggling to keep up. Several human technicians laughed. One of them whistled. Okay, he said. Maybe we overdid a little. Varkon turned toward the human engineering supervisor. That was not part of the original specifications, he said. The supervisor nodded casually. Yeah. Wren frowned. Is that safe? The human considered the question. Then he gave a very honest answer. Safe, he said. He shrugged. Not really. Varkon's eyes narrowed. The human engineer continued. But it'll win. Over the next several days, the pattern continued. One by one, Valoran ships entered the human shipyards, and each one came out different. Stronger hull structures, more efficient power systems, weapons redesigned for faster targeting and greater impact. Even the internal ship layouts were being modified. Valoran officers discovered entire new control interfaces installed by human technicians. Some systems allowed ships to share targeting data across the entire fleet. Others automated defensive responses faster than any Valoran crew could react. The changes were so dramatic that many Valoran engineers struggled to understand their own ships. Late one evening, Commander Wren stood beside Varkon on the observation deck again. Below them, another cruiser emerged from the shipyard. Captain, Wren said quietly. Yes. Wren gestured toward the fleet. These aren't Valoran ships anymore. Varkon watched as the newly rebuilt vessel ignited its engines with smooth, controlled power. No, he agreed. A faint smile appeared on his face. There's something new. Across the fleet, human engineers continued working, and slowly, piece by piece, the defeated Valoran fleet was becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. 2 weeks after the Valoran fleet arrived in the Sol system, the human shipyards finished their work. From orbit, the fleet looked the same as before. The same number of ships, the same hull designs, the same familiar silhouettes drifting near the moon. But every Valoran officer knew the truth. These were not the same ships. Inside the command deck of the Resolute Dawn, Captain Adrian Varkon stood beside Commander Lucas Wren as the fleet status report updated across the main holographic display. Green indicators filled the map. Every ship operational, every system functioning, every vessel reporting performance, levels far beyond their original capabilities. Wren stared at the numbers again. I still don't believe it, he said quietly. Varkon folded his arms. Neither do I. The Starfall, the first cruiser rebuilt by human engineers, had completed multiple test flights over the past week. Each test produced the same result. The ship was faster, stronger, more efficient, and somehow easier to control than before. But the most surprising upgrade wasn't any single system. It was the fleet network. Human engineers had installed a new coordination system across every Valoran vessel. It linked navigation, targeting, defense systems, and tactical data into one shared battlefield network. Every ship could see what every other ship saw. Threat detection happened instantly across the entire fleet. If one ship identified an enemy maneuver, every vessel would know it within milliseconds. Valoran tactical doctrine had never seen anything like it. This level of coordination usually requires a dedicated command vessel. Wren said. Varkon nodded. Humans made the entire fleet the command vessel. Later that day, The Valoran fleet gathered for a full operational simulation. Human Defense Command wanted to test the rebuilt ships against Earth's own defensive forces. The simulation battlefield stretched across several million kilometers of empty space near the outer edge of the solar system. Dozens of human warships formed a defensive formation. Opposite them, the Valoran fleet prepared to attack. Inside the human command station orbiting Earth, Admiral Marcus Hale watched the simulation with interest. Several human officers stood beside him. One of them looked slightly concerned. "Admiral," the officer said quietly, "are we sure about this?" Hale raised an eyebrow. "You mean testing them against us?" "Yes, sir." The officer glanced at the tactical projections. "The Valoran fleet now has technology we designed." Hale smiled slightly. "That's the point." Inside the Resolute Dawn, Captain Varkon studied the simulation battlefield. Human ships formed a tight defensive perimeter. Their formations were precise and disciplined. Valoran fleets traditionally favored direct engagements. But something about this situation felt different. Commander Wren looked toward him. "Orders, Captain?" Varkon hesitated for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. "Let's try what the human suggested." Wren nodded slowly. "You mean the adaptive tactics?" "Yes." Across the fleet, the new tactical network activated. Every ship shared sensor data. Every pilot saw the same battlefield. Every officer understood the same strategy. For the first time in Valoran history, the fleet moved as one mind. Simulation begins in 5, 4, 3. The countdown ended, and everything happened at once. Valoran ships accelerated in multiple directions simultaneously. Instead of attacking directly, they spread across the battlefield in unpredictable patterns. Human tactical officers immediately noticed something unusual. "They're not using standard Valoran formations," one officer said. Admiral Hale nodded. "I know." On the battlefield display, the Valoran fleet moved like a swarm. Individual ships appeared to improvise constantly, adjusting their positions based on real-time tactical data. Human ships attempted to intercept them, but every time they moved to block one Valoran vessel, 3 others appeared somewhere unexpected. Targeting systems linked through the fleet network allowed multiple ships to focus fire on specific human vessels with perfect timing. Human defenses struggled to respond. Within minutes, the simulation began turning in Valoran favor. "Admiral," an officer said quietly, "their reaction time is incredible." Hale crossed his arms, watching carefully. "That's the network," he said. Another officer looked at the display. "They're predicting our movements." Hale nodded. "Not predicting." He gestured toward the screen. "Adapting." Inside the Resolute Dawn, Commander Wren stared at the battle map in disbelief. Human ships were falling out of the simulation one by one. Every time the human fleet tried to regroup, Valoran ships repositioned instantly. Their tactics changed constantly. No predictable patterns. No rigid formations. Just fluid, relentless pressure. "Captain," Wren said slowly. "Yes." "We're winning." Varkon studied the display. The human defensive line was collapsing, and the Valoran fleet hadn't even used full weapon output yet. 5 minutes later, the simulation ended. Across the battlefield, human ships powered down their combat systems. The Valoran fleet drifted to a stop. Silence filled the command deck. Wren leaned back in his chair. "We just defeated Earth's defense fleet." Varkon exhaled slowly. "Yes." Moments later, a communication request appeared on the screen. "Admiral Hale." Varkon accepted the transmission. The human admiral appeared on the display. He looked calm. Satisfied, even. "Congratulations, Captain," Hale said. Wren frowned. "You're not surprised?" Hale shook his head. "No." Varkon studied him carefully. "You expected this outcome." The admiral nodded once. "Of course." He leaned forward slightly. "Because you're not fighting us." The Valoran officers exchanged confused looks. Varkon tilted his head. "Then what exactly did you prepare us for?" Admiral Hale's voice became very calm, very serious. "The Dominion." Silence filled the Valoran bridge. For the first time since arriving in the Sol system, Captain Adrian Varkon began to understand something unsettling. Humans had not rebuilt their fleet simply to help them survive. They had rebuilt it for something much bigger. They had rebuilt it to win a war. 3 weeks after leaving the Sol system, the Valoran fleet returned to the war. The stars of the Terralese corridor burned quietly in the darkness as dozens of Valoran ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. For a moment, space remained calm. Then the long-range sensors lit up. Commander Lucas Wren leaned forward over his console. "Dominion fleet detected," he said. The holographic display above the command deck expanded, revealing the enemy formation. Even after everything they had gained from the human upgrades, the sight still made the Valoran officers uneasy. More than 60 Carthane Dominion warships guarded the corridor, massive battleships surrounded by destroyers and interceptor wings. The same fleet that had crushed the Valoran alliance weeks earlier. Inside the command chair of the Resolute Dawn, Captain Adrian Varkon watched silently. "Have they identified us?" he asked. Wren checked the sensor logs. "Yes," he replied. "They're already forming attack formations." Across the enemy fleet, Dominion ships began shifting into combat positions. Their commanders clearly expected a quick victory. After all, the last time they had encountered the Valoran fleet, it had been broken, running, barely able to defend itself. But today was different. Varkon activated the fleet network. Instantly, every Valoran ship shared sensor data across the battlefield. The new tactical interface spread across the command display like a living map. Every ship's position, every enemy movement, every firing angle, all visible at once. Commander Wren exhaled slowly. "The network is active." Varkon nodded. "Good." He stood, signaled the fleet. The communications officer nodded. "All ships standing by." Varkon looked at the enemy formation. Then he gave the order. "Begin maneuver pattern Delta." Across the Valoran fleet, engines ignited. But instead of forming a traditional battle line, the ships split apart. Cruisers darted sideways across the battlefield. Frigates accelerated forward in narrow attack paths. Destroyers flanked wide around the Dominion formation. Inside the Dominion command ship, confusion spread quickly. "What are they doing?" one officer asked. Dominion fleets relied on strict, predictable battle formations. They expected their enemies to do the same. But the Valoran fleet was moving unpredictably. Ships changed direction constantly. Some accelerated, others slowed. Every maneuver appeared chaotic. But in reality, the fleet was perfectly coordinated. Through the human network system, every captain knew exactly where every other ship was moving. Every maneuver supported another. Every attack created an opening somewhere else. The first Dominion cruiser opened fire. Bright lances of plasma tore through space. But the Valoran ships were already moving. One cruiser slipped past the incoming fire and launched precision strike against the Dominion vessel's shield emitters. Another ship targeted its engines. Within seconds, the Dominion cruiser lost power. It drifted helplessly out of formation. "First enemy vessel disabled," Wren reported calmly. Varkon nodded once. "Continue." The battle intensified. Dominion warships attempted to regroup. But every time they formed a defensive line, Valoran ships appeared in unexpected positions. Human-modified engines allowed the Valoran fleet to accelerate faster than Dominion commanders predicted. Human targeting systems allowed weapons to fire with frightening accuracy. But the most devastating advantage was still the fleet network. When one Valoran ship identified a weakness in an enemy's shield coverage, every ship knew it instantly. Within seconds, multiple Valoran vessels concentrated fire on that single weak point. Dominion ships began falling one after another. Inside the Dominion command vessel, panic spread. "This is impossible," one officer shouted. "These are the same Valoran ships we fought before." The Dominion commander stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "No," he said slowly, "they're not." Back aboard the Resolute Dawn, the battle was unfolding exactly as human simulations predicted. Commander Wren studied the display. "Dominion formations are collapsing. Casualties?" Varkon asked. "Minimal on our side." Wren looked up. "They can't keep up with our maneuvering." Outside the viewing window, a massive Dominion battleship, attempted to turn toward a group of Valoran cruisers. But 3 Valoran ships suddenly appeared behind it. Their weapons fired simultaneously. The battleship's shields collapsed. Moments later, its engines exploded in a burst of light. Across the battlefield, the Dominion fleet began retreating. "Enemy ships are withdrawing," the censor officer announced. Varkon watched silently as the remaining Dominion vessels turned away from the fight. For the first time in decades, the Dominion had lost a battle, and they knew it. An hour later, the battlefield fell silent. Disabled Dominion ships drifted quietly through space. The Valoran fleet regrouped. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, the officers stared at the final battle report. Commander Wren shook his head slowly. "We just defeated the Dominion." Varkon nodded. "Yes." But his eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, because something about the battle felt familiar. The unpredictable tactics, the constant adaptation, the refusal to follow traditional battle doctrine. He had seen it before, during the simulation against Earth. Wren seemed to realize it at the same moment. "Captain," he said quietly. Varkon looked toward him. Wren gestured at the battlefield. "We didn't just win that battle." Varkon nodded slowly. "No." Across the silent bridge, the realization spread among the Valoran officers. They had not fought like Valorans. They had fought like something else entirely. Something the galaxy barely understood. Something far more dangerous. They had fought like humans. The war didn't end in a single battle. But the battle in the Terralese corridor changed everything. News spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. The Carthane Dominion, a power that had dominated entire star regions for decades, had just suffered a humiliating defeat, and the fleet responsible was one that had already been written off as destroyed, the Valoran fleet. But the reports coming from the battlefield were strange, very strange. Survivors from the Dominion described ships moving in ways Valoran vessels never had before. Faster maneuvers, perfectly coordinated attacks, weapons striking with impossible precision. Some even claimed the Valoran fleet seemed to think as one organism, adapting instantly to every change in the battlefield. Dominion analysts reviewed combat recordings for weeks. Eventually, one detail appeared in every report. A small marking visible on several Valoran hull plates. Simple text. For words. Modified on Earth. Months passed. With their rebuilt fleet, the Valorans slowly pushed Dominion forces back across multiple systems. They didn't win every battle, but the war had changed. The Dominion could no longer predict Valoran tactics. They could no longer rely on superior firepower. And slowly, system by system, the Dominion's control began to crumble. Eventually, the Dominion withdrew from the contested territories entirely, not because they had been completely destroyed, but because they realized something unsettling. The Valoran fleet they once defeated no longer existed. Something new had replaced it. Nearly a year after arriving in the Sol system, the Valoran fleet returned to Earth. This time, they arrived as victors. Dozens of ships drifted peacefully near the massive human shipyards orbiting the moon. But the Valoran crews noticed something immediately. Human engineers were already busy building new vessels, expanding the shipyards, improving infrastructure. To them, the events of the war seemed almost routine. Inside the main orbital station, Captain Adrian Varkon walked beside Admiral Marcus Hale through a wide observation corridor overlooking the shipyards. Massive construction platforms floated beyond the glass. Hundreds of workers moved across the unfinished hull of a new starship. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Varkon broke the silence. "The war is over," he said. Hale nodded. "So I heard." Varkon looked at him carefully. "You already knew." The human admiral gave a small smile. "We ran the probabilities." They stopped near the viewing window. Below them, a Valoran cruiser drifted slowly past the station, one of the ships rebuilt by human engineers. Varkon studied it quietly. Then he asked the question that had been lingering in his mind for months. "Why did you help us?" Hale tilted his head slightly. "You asked for repairs." Varkon shook his head. "That was not a repair." He gestured toward the fleet outside. "You redesign our entire navy." The admiral rested his hands behind his back. Technically, yes. Varkon frowned slightly. But why? The human officer seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Because your ships were broken. Varkon sighed. They were damaged in battle. Hale shook his head. No. He pointed toward the cruiser outside. They were built with limitations. Varkon folded his arms. Limitations exist for safety. The Admiral nodded. Sure. Then he said something that made Varkon pause. But safety doesn't win wars. They continued walking through the station corridor. Human engineers passed them carrying toolkits and datapads. None of them seemed particularly interested in the fact that the Valoran fleet had just helped defeat one of the galaxy's largest military powers. To them, the work simply continued. Finally, Varkon stopped walking. There's something the galaxy is beginning to understand, he said. Hale raised an eyebrow. Oh! The Dominion believed they were fighting Valorans. The human admiral chuckled quietly. That was their first mistake. Varkon nodded slowly. They weren't. For a moment, the two commanders stood in silence, watching ships drift past the station. Then Varkon asked one final question. If repairing our fleet changed the war? He looked directly at the human admiral. What would happen if humanity ever decided to build its own fleet like this? Hale thought about the question. Then he smiled faintly. Honestly, Varkon waited. The admiral shrugged casually. We probably already did. Later that evening, as the Valoran fleet prepared to depart the Sol system once again, Captain Varkon reviewed the final engineering reports attached to each ship. Every vessel carried the same small inscription installed by the human technicians, a quiet reminder of where their transformation began. For simple words etched into the hull plating. Modified on Earth, across the galaxy, civilizations began updating their strategic doctrines. One new rule slowly appeared in military briefings and diplomatic discussions alike. A rule no one had considered before. If a fleet arrives at Earth asking for repairs, the galaxy might soon face something far more dangerous than a repaired ship, because when humans fix things, they rarely return them the way they were.